me sign out and sign back in, Jaco, and it just take me half a second because I've lost my speaker here, and I think it's at my. Oh, here we go. That might be it.
Got it now?
Now do I have you?
Test 1 2.
There we go. Got it. Okay.
Juanito. Do you hear me, Juanito?
I do. Hey, do you see what's going on here? Oh my gosh! It's just pouring. It's miserable. It's pouring.
Jeez.
So
we're gonna have a show together.
Well, they have this severe thunderstorm warning. You know what's funny? I, for whatever reason, last night, for some crazy reason, I just was on the internet in YouTube or something, and it just started showing videos of a couple of different videos of lightning striking trees by people and hitting cars and everything else. And it was out of the blue, so I was watching it. So I don't know. I mean, we got a couple of guys in our community that have been hit by lightning. So I hope I hope I don't get added to the list.
Well, you're in a car. It'll look around you. You're good. Now,
yeah, that's right.
It's interesting that you came up with that because I saw your show on Nino's Corner where you were talking about the Giants, and I was like, and then after David killed Goliath, he went after his kin and killed them too. I was like, why did they leave that out of the Bible? Because that's like really dramatic. He went on and killed more giants. So
well, it's there in the Bible. I never in all the years saw it until I had a pastor who told me about it. I don't know, probably 30 years ago, and I'm like, what? Yeah. Look here, this.
Well, what's interesting about that is I had scheduled to go giant hunting in the caves here in Nevada, and there's lots of caves here where the Indians said they were getting tired of the giants cannibalize them. So they attacked them and burned them in their caves and everything. So there's stories of those, and then I guess they have mummies of them and all kind of crazy stuff, but that's all been covered over. So your story yesterday kind of was interesting because after I listened to your show, I went out and looked for the giants. It's crazy.
I had an acquaintance, 3-4 decades ago, and he was based in northern Arizona. And he had property that crossed from northern Arizona into Colorado.
Wow.
And in this large ranch. And he had all sorts of drawings, cave-type drawings, all over his property.
Petroglyphs.
And so he took me out. We went on motorcycles, and he showed me a bunch of the drawings. And I mean, this is 30, 35, 40 years ago.
Wow.
And he said his interpretation was, and the history from the local Indians was, these are the drawings that they had put in place where they had killed giants and a whole tribe of giants that were cannibals. And this was their ancient history. And by ancient history, he was talking, 500 to 600 years earlier. Mm-hmm. Not thousands of years, just before, the white man showed up type of thing. And that they had to fight all across that region of the Southwest to kill the giants. And that was part of the reason, like for the Pueblos, where they were living in the side of the hill where the giants couldn't sneak up on them.
Oh my God, that's the reason why. That's crazy. So were they red-headed giants? Because, we've seen out in Easter Island, they had red hats, red head. And the story there is like the natives basically turned against their giants as well and killed them off.
Well, and he had a lot of information. This friend, I've got, I don't know if he wrote 2 books or just one. I had a with all pictures in it.
Wow.
And it's in with my sci-fi stuff. And I don't think it got very wide distribution because he was pretty gruesome in some of his descriptions of what was there. And he went into a lot of detail about this history all across the region. He had spent years researching this, and because he had these glyphs all over his property. And we probably went on the motorcycles and looked at maybe 30 of these glyphs that were etched into the stone and painted. Some of them were very well preserved. Yeah. And little caves that he had. Because where he was at, and I'll just tell you, it was north of Sholo, Arizona. Mm-hmm. And there was kind of a river bed that was kind of like an ancient riverbed that was up in that area that crossed through part of his farm. And so there was caves along that area, and we went into several of the caves watching for rattlesnakes. And he would show me the glyphs that he had found. And what they told the story of was how these giants were hunting them, and then they learned how to attack the giants and killed them back. And that's the story of these glyphs. And that it was not easy to kill these giants at first, and then they came up with techniques to outnumber them, attack them, and kill them. And that was because it was their self-protection. Their war was with the giants.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. There's in Sedona, I lived there for several years, and there's ranches in Sedona where they have a lot of glyphs like that. But it looks like extraterrestrial type stuff too. So very, very interesting. All this is 11:11 a.m. where I'm at right now. So kind of interesting the number stuff. So yeah, I mean, they hide all this stuff from us. They, whoever they are, the deep state, the globalists, and so forth. They come in and they basically, hide all this. Oh, it was just Indians lived in this cave. They didn't tell the story of how, the Indians basically attacked the giants and, crashed down boulders on top of them and burned them in their caves and all kind of crazy stuff. It's all gone. But the local Indian tribes still have those stories like you're talking about.
Well, the other thing that's interesting, I was in North Africa and some of the stuff with the Dogon tribe.
Yeah.
The ancient stuff. And one of the people that was interesting, he learned English only like 10 or 15 years before I met him, but he was in his probably early 50s, maybe mid-50s at the time I met him. So he grew up not knowing how to communicate these things, and he learned how to communicate and in English. And so he was super interesting to me because he hadn't been tweaked,
right? Maybe
with Western thoughts, ideas, whatever. And he said when he was growing up, that his understanding within the Dogon community was that a lot of the things that are interpreted as spacesuits and helmets and all sorts of crazy stuff, they said no, they wore costumes, and the costumes they would literally wear stuff that made them look different than they were, like a fish costume, and then they were doing rituals that their interpretation was that what was maybe interpreted today as being somehow a fact was part of some kind of a mystery or an illusion to try and fool the people. Then it took time for them to learn how to tell the difference between the reality and what they were being, coached or mytholized to see. And so, for example, they do these rituals where they would all go out into the sea together and appear to go into the sea overnight and then come back in the daytime. And a lot of the modern people with that, they went out and slept in their spaceship in the ocean and came back out in the daytime and were around them. And so there's a lot there. But the Dogon have a huge they knew about stuff like the star Sirius and the star system around it long before we had telescopes to see a lot of this stuff. And so there's all sorts of interesting sidebars to that where you don't just dismiss their understanding of, the star systems and space and things like that, easily.
Yeah, the Hopi and their Kachina, they put a mask basically to hide themselves from, the Hopi. And the Hopi put the mask on to, mimic them. So there's lots of these stories, throughout the entire world, as we're pointing out. Now, this negative group, I think there's positive and there's negative. This negative group is sees power in the world, the globalists, as we, speak of them. And they're being, hammered right now in Iraq. Or Iran, I mean. So the takedown of the deep state just went kinetic big time. What are your thoughts?
Well, just before we go there, because I do want to talk about that, but I just wanted to mention one thing. So there was a guy that did a book on the Hopi, and he took the various stories that they would share, down over time, that was handed down, and he put it in a book. And so I have a copy of that book somewhere in my stuff. The thing that stood out in his entire book when I read it, that I thought, man, how could you see it this way? He said they had a story that they passed down that at the end of this age, before the white man that had come to the area would, their power would change. They would somehow become more equal or be able to get along together better. But there was some great reckoning for the white man. And that there would be in that era, it was intended to the elders to help the generations in between recognize the end times. It's like, think of the Bible with Revelations. And if you can understand, or Daniel with the end of the age, that these prophets were giving you information so you know when you're in the end times, some markers that you'll see. One of the markers that was given to the people, the Hopi people, by these seers or prophets or whatever, was that in that era, there would be a machine or a mirror that you would look into this mirror. And in the mirror, you could see everything about yourself or anyone else. That the mirror could show you every detail of your life, from the beginning of your life, where you were going, etc. And that you wouldn't be able to hide anything from the mirror. And when you think about it, isn't that the modern computer?
Yeah. Kind of a looking glass technology, but yeah, I could see it.
Yes. And so, when you would look into a people or a person that doesn't have the ability to, just a second, I'm sending a call to space here. You've never seen a computer. You're in a non-technological world, and you're trying to describe something in a way that someone would at least be able to understand it at the time somehow. But then out over time, when you got to that era and you hear that, you could go, oh, actually, now I have, they're looking through a glass darkly, trying to describe something from a world that's, it'd be like trying to describe a microwave in the 1850s. How would you describe it? What does it do?
And through a glass darkly, like Patton poem. Yeah, that's great. So I was like, sometimes I'm like, I'm gonna get Juan on this one. I'm gonna be like, outsmart him on this, and then you come back with like 10 times. So I was like, God, is there anything you don't know? Like, what the heck?
Well, I'm sure there's lots and lots of. I'm reminded, hourly that I don't know a lot of stuff, so I keep having to learn. But the thing with Iran, everybody needs to, within our community, I think, take a little bit of a breath.
Yes.
And remember, war has a lot of faces. It plays out in lots of arenas. It's not just lead in the air, missiles. There's other types of technology, and ultimately, what's the war over? Hearts and minds, attitudes, perspectives, things like that. So while we're, they're shooting missiles and we're shooting missiles and there's drones and, life and limb is on the line. The lead up to the war, where it gets kinetic, and even after the bullets stop flying, trying to define what a win or loss is, that's the theater of the mind. And unwittingly, a lot of our community is being gamed in this, and all sides, multiple sides, not just black and white, not just America and Iran, or America, Israel, and Iran. There's lots of different vectors. Everybody has an angle that they want to somehow own some aspect of a victory in this whole thing. And so there's a lot of jousting to try to define what exactly is happening and whose fight this is, etc. And that includes in the communication, cyber, memes, videos, all sorts of things to get us to think and view this stuff in a certain way. And, as I was saying earlier on Nino and a couple of the other shows that I was sharing on, the reality is that there's been a very, very, very sophisticated campaign to get, the conservative community, people that maybe would otherwise at least be not taking a side with Trump or would side with Trump, to bring them over hard against Trump because he is being puppeteered by Israel regarding Iran. And a lot of that's coming out of specifically China. And then, Iran is very sophisticated in the communications networks around the world. Khomeini and his people have, been very sophisticated in this. And so trying to twist the story as though what America, what Trump is doing, what our military is doing right now, somehow is carrying Netanyahu's water or Israel's water. And my contention is that that's a completely fallacious way to view this. Iran hasn't just been a threat to Israel by any stretch. When you go to the Congo, Iran was heavily, heavily involved in Africa, all over the place, and especially in the Congo, and was present and assisted over this last almost 50 years, 47 years, even prior to the regime taking control in Iran. And during that time period, you had 20 million people killed in the Congo in this religious war going on in the Congo that Iran was very much part of. I think that China and everybody else was in there. I think Iran's good for half of those people dead directly with the group around Khomeini and like that. So Is that carrying the water for Israel? No. They were exporting terrorism and terroristic methodologies, ideas, and supporting people doing that, let alone, look at the situation in Lebanon. 300,000 missiles that Iran built in Iran and shipped into Lebanon over the last 20 years. Missiles going into Syria and into other areas, 100,000 more into Gaza. So where was all the money coming from? And of course, this was this imminent threat against Israel. What's Israel supposed to do? Just sit there and wait for them to blow them up? So, both sides amping it up. And from a Trump perspective, how are you going to bring peace to the Mideast without engaging everybody? So Trump wasn't just doing things for Israel. He went over. Netanyahu tried to call him for 2 weeks to get a call through the Trump, and Trump wouldn't take the call for 2 weeks prior to his trip over to Saudi Arabia and then Qatar. And Netanyahu didn't want him to do the deal. Well, he went over and did 2 deals, 2 of the biggest arms deals in history with Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And they agreed to buy massive amounts of American jets, drones, surveillance equipment, weapons, systems, domes, everything, okay? Now, why is that relevant? Because the systems that they bought then have to be maintained, serviced, resupplied. People have to be trained. All of those personnel to use those come to U.S. military bases, learn how to fly those aircraft, learn how to maintain those aircraft and missile systems. If they so much as sneeze the wrong direction, we cut them off. And all those systems are, paperweights very quickly. So they have to stay on the good side of American policy, and that includes not attacking other allies in the region. And so what we really did is we got them to agree to spend all of their free cash here in the U.S., maintaining U.S. jobs, getting their training here, and at some level, by exposure, Americanizing their military components by association to the way that we see things. And if they don't kind of work with us on this stuff, it's all junk. And so Iran's a perfect example. When the Shah fell and the Ayatollah came into power in 1979, they couldn't keep their F-14s flying. They couldn't keep their missiles working. And their defense systems went to crap almost immediately. And just so people kind of remember the story, what was the deal in the mid-'80s? Iran-Contra. What happened? They couldn't maintain their equipment, so they were searching the world covertly to get maintenance parts and supplies to keep their American weapon systems working. And that was the whole Ollie North thing. Israeli intelligence sold spare parts to Iran, and then the money from those spare parts was diverted to the Contras in South America. And then America resupplied Israel with new parts. And so, and Reagan took the blame for it, but that was actually done by Bush. Bush 1, who was vice president at the time, and his friends and buddies. And that information, that portion of the story, is amongst the papers that Ollie North was burning, destroying in the basement of the White House. The only stuff they kept was the bank records, account numbers and balances, and that's the stuff that Fawn Hall carried out of the White House in her boots, her cowboy boots, by the way. And so Fawn Hall was a secretary for Ollie North. A lot of your listeners aren't old enough to remember this stuff. or weren't even born. And Fawn Hall, by the way, very beautiful gal. Even today, she still is been very has maintained a very attractive presentation. Just so you know. So anyway.
Yeah. So other things that are going on as far as like the AI world. We just had President Trump like day before we went in and hit Iran. He dumped what was it, Anthropic, and then he went with OpenAI. So what's going on with that? What do you think?
Well, infiltration. And by the way, how many times I got to ask you this question? How many times in the last couple of days have you had to stumble over Iraq and Iran? Because we come from an era where it was Iraq, and all of a sudden now we're back to Iran. So I've probably had to restate it, 100 times in the last few days because it just jumps out immediately, Iraq. But anyway,
I spent a lot of time there. Maybe why.
There is, there is a crowd within the Pentagon, the military, that absolutely is, working for another side, whatever other side it is. It's not Trump, right? And so they have access. They work at the keyboards. They do all sorts of stuff. Well, if they don't like something and they get wind of it, then they pass the word to friends and buddies and other situations. It's going down this way or that way, and can interfere with American operations. And by the way, some of these people, they're not just acting in a treasonous, traitorous way, in a soft way. They're very proactive to, damage anything, pro-Trump. They're literally traitors in our midst in these military units. And so whether it's, direct human intervention or somehow there is electronic mechanisms, spy mechanisms that got into any of those systems, various worms, things like that, they cut that off from any active involvement in being able to access data related to this attack that was coming on Iran. And, if you think about it, a lot of the people that have built that are in the sites right now working for other globalist organizations one way or another. So that's the context.
Yeah, very good. And, these deep staters, they know when these attacks are coming, or whatever's going on, because there was a lot of put options that went down on last, I guess, the end of the trading on Friday. So a lot of put options went in, and a lot of call options went in on silver, and we can talk about silver in a minute. But who put those put options in there? It's kind of reminds me of 9/11, right? Was it some of these Congress people that are definitely working for the dark side too?
Well, the other thing that I would say that goes in there, though, Trump wasn't hiding where he was going. You didn't have to be a rocket scientist to know that we were about to do something here. I think that anybody that didn't know it was coming was probably being naive. So you didn't have to be doing, let's say, insider trading in the classical sense to have known something was becoming imminent. But look, we sent out the word. If you're an American and you're anywhere in Iran, get the fuck out. If you're in Israel, get the fuck out. And do it yesterday, not tomorrow. No. And so I don't think, while there was, call it whatever kind of trading you want, and for example, even with silver, which I think is still going to get hit one more time, by the way. So I don't want anybody to get fooled by this. It's going way, way, way higher. But I think they may drag it back down just a little bit here in the later in this next week. But it was up about $20 over the last week or so.
Right.
And because the pressure on the silver market is fundamental. It's a material that's used for industrial purposes, unlike gold, really. And so the pressure to, have real silver available for industrial purposes, for manufacturing in a very thin market is huge. But the other counterpoint is the amount of paper silver that still has to be neutralized is just so massive. And so while they're trying to liquidate these paper silver positions, they've got to try to manipulate the markets and hold them down. So, no great mystery there. If you're holding physical silver, if you're taking transactions even right now in physical silver, you're a genius, because the physical silver pricing is going to go up radically from here. So in a simple world, probably bare ass minimum about 4 times from current value, maybe as soon as by the end of the year. So certainly within this administration, just so you know.
Yeah, I totally agree with those numbers. And midway through the year, maybe 250 and then 500 at the end of the year, but it remains to be seen. Could be more, because we're in a different situation now. And if you look at the past, those numbers would work just like they have in the past. But we're in a whole different situation now with the taking down the deep state and the war against the deep state. So it could even go higher. Who knows? Now,
well, hold on. Let's not pass that too quickly. Let me just add one other thing, Michael. Remember, when you name these prices or values in silver, you're comparing it to, here in America in the West, a dollar price. And so a lot of that price issue, even when you say is it 250 or 500, it's not just that silver goes up in value for, say, what it can buy you, say a car or a suit or something like that in convertible currency, but the dollar itself is under attack.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm talking a separate conversation, but just to touch on a hint, the bond issue, the way that this urgent, monstrous, unbelievable crisis that's looming in the bond market would be addressed if it weren't that Trump was in there, is there would be this massive printing of dollars, kind of like 2008.
Right.
Think about the 2008-9 banking crisis and all the money that was printed, and where the hell did it go? And then even within the COVID period, all the money was printed and no bookkeeping, accounting, anybody being told where it went actually. This bond crisis that we're on the brink of right now, that really goes full tilt somewhere mid-2027, late 2027, 2028, and continues for a decade.
Wow.
That bond crisis is probably easily 20 times bigger than what happened in 2008. So the amount of money that, if you're going to roll over this debt and try to cancel it and do other stuff, the way that you would do that is in printing money to service these things, so you don't have whole states going into bankruptcy, let alone counties and the various different operations, schools and things like that. So with that in mind, if they print massive amount of dollars, paper money, it dilutes the value of the existing paper money. And so that's where you get your inflation from. People want more of the fake money to buy anything, and it's highly inflated. And then the way that you have to think of this, in my opinion, is what if Hillary had won in 2016 and took the presidency in 2017? What was it that the crowd that was pushing for Hillary to be president, she was somebody else's puppet, just like Biden was somebody else's puppet, just like Obama was somebody else's puppet. Remember, Obama's a creation of CIA. Totally fictitious, everything. And by the way, who at the CIA during that period leading up to Obama coming on the scene, who was in charge of fake identities and histories in that area? John Brennan. And so, yeah, it's coming. It's coming. I'm telling you, take it to the bank. He knows it. Everybody around him knows it. They're going to take him down. And I think it's somewhere in the next 3 weeks to 8 weeks. The grand jury,
this is our opinions. We're not or anything like that, but we'll see.
Yeah. So with that in mind, when they do take down Brennan, that you pull on that thread, it's going to go so many other places. And by the way, we've seen Gitmo go through some expansions. There was additional authorization for a further expansion just a month ago. Another 500 million, 89 more cells.
I haven't heard that.
Courtrooms. Yeah, 3 more courtrooms.
3 more. I remember when you came on before, and we blew up a show where you were talking about they were going to video some of these proceedings, and they built 2 courtrooms for that. So 3 more.
Yeah, 3 more, and expanding the hospital further to be able to handle geriatric patients. And if you look at the flights, the actual, they still post flights going down to Gitmo. So from Andrews Air Force Base, you've been having, pretty steadily about 2 a day, sometimes 3 or 4 a day, and skip a day of these flights where the manifests, who exactly is on the plane, other than a number, not the specific names, they're classified. And the configuration of the cabins in the planes tell you a lot. If it's a VIP cabin or if it's just a standard seating cabin. And they've been running these flights down to Gitmo like crazy. Why? Because they're getting ready to do something very dramatic. And, part of the question is you've got 3 grand juries that are in session here in the country right now, hearing testimony about the 2020 election and Russia stuff. How will those manifest? Will it be something that goes into the normal Justice Department, or will aspects of it be such that they end up going straight to Gitmo? And one of the things that Trump did that has not been covered anywhere, but you have a media that doesn't want to cover this stuff. One of the things that Trump did when he came into office last year is he specifically signed a order authorizing that civilians can be tried at Gitmo and housed at Gitmo for crimes, treasonous crimes against the country, so that U.S. citizens can go to Gitmo, be incarcerated there, and tried there in a military tribunal setting for crimes against America. So for treason, traitorism, etc., espionage. And, the other thing is, even though, it's a very dramatic thing that we have, 89 new cells being added and expanded, there's one other thing. I've mentioned it before, but it bears repeating right now. The harbor to the side of Gitmo is set up. The Marines have their own carrier, and that carrier is a short carrier. It's for like the V-22s and like that, for the huge prop plane that works like a helicopter and airplane, and other marine aircraft specifically. Those V-22s can carry people. They can go all the way up to South Carolina, no fuel stop, back and forth to Gitmo. So there's the ability to place that small carrier there, right, mile offshore. And then the other thing that's possible there, they put in all this new piering back in Trump's first term. And those concrete piers that were set in there are set up precisely to handle all of the FEMA ships that we have for emergency responses in the hospital ship and like that for the rest of the country. All of them can be put down there at Gitmo, and they're essentially sunk in place so that they're able to handle a Cat 6 storm. Because you have to think, you're on the water and you get storms like that, and you get some pretty monstrous ones. A little weather manipulation, some of those take off. No, those ships will be safe. They're not going to sink. They can literally be sunk right into the sand at those locations. And total, those FEMA ships have a capacity, a cumulative capacity of like 25,000 people if they wanted to house them. So that's what's been asserted. I've heard lower numbers and higher numbers, but I think that's pretty close to the correct number. We'll see. There's a lot of stuff that we can speculate on, and you get mentally into a zone, but how it exactly plays out, we're just going to have to watch. But the direction that things are going, I don't think there should be any question that, as I said numerous times, I think I said it even with your listeners, Michael, back when Pelosi was, talking, smack about closing Gitmo and like that, hey, Nancy, if you're really in charge over there at Congress, just go ahead and put the order out, close Gitmo down, cut off all the financing, and just to make sure it never comes back. Look, all those Marines down there, they just love to do crazy stuff, break things, etc. Have a beer party, have a demolition derby, have a contest, and let them take all the construction equipment down there at Gitmo. Why bring it back? We left all that stuff over in Afghanistan, billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of equipment. So what do you care? We don't care about protecting it. Let's take all the construction equipment, turn these guys loose, give them some beer, and let them go down and just smash and bash all the fences, the buildings, the electronics, all the underground bunkers, anything that they can find, and destroy Gitmo so it can never come back. Okay, never happened. Gitmo is alive and well. Yeah. So what's really going on here?
YMCA for sailors, and maybe you can go down and start that. Trump's always talking about YMCA in his events. That song's always going off, so maybe there's connection there. I don't know.
I think it's fantastic. Well, my chief of staff, he actually was stationed at Gitmo, and he was the one that supervised the installation of the media center. Oh, wow. So that's why I, kind of asked him and helped get him into a situation where he's doing daily shows now over at PPN and Patriot Party Network. And because he now qualifies to be part of the media pool once things start going live in a very active way over at Gitmo, and who would be more qualified to give us real information and real understanding than the guy that was actually there in the senior position, running the base. So I'm looking forward to getting the reports from Gitmo from Matt.
Yeah. So maybe July 4th celebration is we're going to be celebrating a lot of things during that time frame.
Well, and by the way, just remind me, you know what? I don't think you and Matt have ever met, but he's right there in Nevada. Oh, cool. I'll be through Las Vegas somewhere here in the next couple of weeks. Let's get together and break bread.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll do it.
Because you'll want to have him available to you and your listeners as this whole Gitmo thing builds out. And so I would love to make sure that you guys are communicating. He'd be a great guest too, by the way. You'd really enjoy him.
Yeah, sounds great.
He was the one that actually personally briefed Trump on Fast and Furious.
No kidding.
Yeah, and he did the work behind the scenes on that. Much of it that's never been spoken of, although he wrote about big parts of it. By the way, Trump the other day in something at the White House acknowledged Brian Terry as one of these people who had died in service to the country, and raised the issues of his death there too on Fast and Furious. So we're coming closer to day of reckoning or days of reckoning in a lot of these issues. So I know the Terry family was appreciative. Trump hasn't forgotten them.
Very good. Very good. All right. So any other points you want to bring up?
Well, there is one interesting thing. I'll shoot it over to you. Maybe you can share it wherever you have for your audience. There was an interesting video that got leaked out just the other day. We were talking about space and aliens and the Indians and all this other stuff. Hillary, she's actually a witch, a card-carrying for real witch. She belongs to the Witches' Coven there in L.A., the Wing Coven is what they call themselves. And then she's an honorary member of the Wing Coven in New York. Crazy. And so when she would sneak off back when Bill was president and ditch her Secret Service detail, she got away with it several times. She'd show up in California because she'd be at one of her Coven events. And then they finally worked a deal where she wouldn't do that and had an escort. But she would do these events. And remember, Bill and Hillary, where'd they go for their honeymoon? Bill talks about it in his book. They went to Haiti for their honeymoon and then hung out, and he watched the witch doctor doing the voodoo stuff on people. And Bill was amazed at how complete control he had over the voodoo witch doctor would have over his victims. And, but Hillary is filmed, and it's actually pretty good film of her at a bizarre event. She's wearing purple robes, satin white collars, and all this star field of lights above them and all these other people present. And it's a very cultish, bizarre event. And the context is, it's almost like, remember the group that was looking when Halley's Comet came by and all went and did their rituals and took the suicide pill and went to their beds and went to sleep and died, and they were going to be transported to, Halley's Comet as it came by and all that. A very bizarre group. This crowd reminded me of that there, but with a more sinister look. Remember, at the end of the day, a lot of the crowd that were fighting globally that's in the background, we refer to them as Luciferian. They're Satan worshipers, Baal, Moloch, all this sort of thing. But the core of much of those stories, for example, if you're talking the Baal worshipers, the story is that you had 200 literally space aliens, humanoid, not human in the sense that they were descendants of Adam, but humanoid in the sense that they had a body much like ours. And they fell to Earth. And when they fell to Earth, that implies it wasn't under power. It wasn't like they landed. It wasn't like they came here necessarily out of choice. They fell to Earth, very much like Satan, Lucifer, the devil. where Christ says, I saw you fall like lightning to the earth. We think of spacecraft, re-entering from an orbit at high speed, and that they leave a trail as they're burning off energy, momentum, and causing heat in the atmosphere in contact with the oxygen as they're slowing down. So it looks like a lightning bolt almost. And there was 200, according to the ancient lore, that fell to earth at Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon's to the north side of Israel, right there on the border between Israel and Syria. And Mount Hermon's like a 6,000 foot high mountain. So the highest altitude World Heritage Site for the UN that we commemorate as a historical site is this landing place at the top of Mount Hermon, where these 200 humanoids fell to earth. I mean, that's, it sounds like kids' fairy tale stuff or sci-fi book. It's the highest altitude UN World Heritage Site on the planet, commemorating the landing location of these 200 that fell to earth. Now think of falling like in a life preserver or something, a dinghy. Something happened, and they had to go to the green planet, blue planet, whatever, and fell to earth, and that's where they landed in this emergency situation, possibly. 200 landed at the top of the mountain, and apparently they couldn't leave. They were stuck here, so they fell to earth. They walked down the mountain, and they built a city at the base of Mount Hermon. And the name of the city is the city of Baal, B-A-A-L. And that city is known historically as a place where children were sacrificed. So if you wanted favor with these space aliens that fell to Earth, you would bring a child to be sacrificed by them. And by the way, in these sacrificial things, you would eat a sacrifice. The priests would eat a sacrifice, so literally cannibalize. And but if they're aliens, they're not cannibalizing; they're just eating babies. And so, in the scripture in the Bible, it refers to this practice of making your children to pass through the flame, pass through the fire. Well, that's a very Sunday pastor preaching from the pulpit way of saying roasting your children alive, killing them for somebody to eat. They just made them to pass through the flame. Sounds, very, not jarring. Okay, it's just kind of, you have to think about it to realize the horror of what's being portrayed. But this was something that the people in that region were doing. It wasn't just the Israelites, but other countries around that region were practicing child sacrifice. Well, the place where that whole practice originated was at the city of Baal, at the base of Mount Hermon. And that's part of all this ritual. They believe in some sects of this, just like any other religion. You have different sects of the religion, and one group believes in sprinkling, and one believes in full immersion for baptism or something like that. They have all sorts of different variations, but in the whole, these different groups believe that their origin was in the Sirius star group. And so we see the star Sirius, and a lot of these religions are based around, including the Dogon and like that, having an origin there and somehow found their way to Earth. And within what's said, they're portrayed as being like our cousins, okay? Different father, within a family or something. And so we're related, but distantly so. So with all of that in mind, Hillary appears to be presiding over a cult-like ritual beneath this roof of stars, and everybody portraying different of the, alien groups. It's a Star Wars bar scene or something like that. Hillary's presiding over it. That just came out. That came out in the context of her getting ready for her testimony. Somebody wanted us to see her role, her involvement in that. And I believe it ties into her whole presentation within the witches, the covens, and like that. And this belief that ultimately they're part of this other tribe. This other tribe believes they're Luciferian. And so they're light bringers. And they're children of the light, Lucifer being cloaked in light as a veil, a cover, a camouflage, coming as an angel of light. And so there's this whole thing. It's open to interpretation by anybody that watches it, but it's quite bizarre. And I'll forward you that clip, which is being passed around. I think everybody should look at that and kind of understand this is the crowd that was working very, very hard to get into power. And it was only because Trump was able to succeed with some assistance and win in 2016 that we didn't have Hillary and her crowd in power. And to finish the conversation going back where I started, had Hillary won, they intended to take down the dollar, meld us into a world financial system that would be digitally based with the crypto such as Bitcoin, which is a DARPA creation, just like Facebook is a DARPA creation to control and own the direction the whole world was intended to go, and to do a number of catastrophes, a nuclear strike in Seattle, the biological coming out of Wilshire Boulevard, where the helicopters were at, and they intercepted that material that didn't get put out to the world. COVID would have happened, a year sooner. This whole crowd has been short-stopped, and now with taking out Iran, which was a cover for the terrorism, and then taking control of these countries and the excuse of these countries threatening Israel for this huge budget going to Israel, unbelievable amount of money from the U.S. They are the largest lobbying group in Washington, D.C., the second largest being the Arab countries, which ultimately, real numbers, probably larger than what Israel has as a lobbying group in Washington, D.C. But as Trump works the deals, such as what he did with Saudi Arabia and Qatar, it removes the excuse for America to spend so much money there and to essentially take the legs out from under this large global plan to bring the world to a world war, a religious war by the three Abrahamic religions, which is exactly what is described and called for by many of these groups working around the world together, tied together, as was originally laid out in the Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike in his Masonic writings in the middle of the 1800s. In Morals and Dogma, he calls for 3 world wars, and the Third World War would be a religious war based around Jerusalem. And this is before the modern day Israel even existed. These groups worked together to create the current political Israel, and then use that as a stumbling block for the world to create a context for World War III, as they would call it. I would call it World War IV. We already won World War III. What Trump's trying to do is to shortstop them from being able to do this world war that many of them want, and then going to shutting down the AI and the electronic systems Washington, D.C. is built around these Masonic groups and tribes, and every angle, every street, every building, every symbolic thing practically is all Masonic. And they recruit and build out within the military and policing agencies nationally the secret handshake groups that are in high office, in high position, especially in the military. So with that in mind, and they are not happy with what Trump's doing by short-stopping them getting their Third World War. When those systems, those electronic communications tracking systems were unplugged, anybody that thought they were going to know exactly what Trump had in mind, convey it to buddies, maybe cause some mischief, etc., got caught by surprise, and bam, it's on, and they, they're in a room with the lights turned out. They don't get to see any of it, and they can't communicate to their buddies what's going on, covertly, overtly, anything. And also within our allies, who may only be half allies across NATO and things like that. So that was a pretty long explanation, but I hope, did that make sense to you, what I was trying to convey there, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we love that. You're, like I said, you're deep. And, I attended a lecture one time by a guy that was part of the Masonic group, or, maybe the some other group. I won't name names, but he basically showed Mount Hermon, and it looked like a spacecraft had crash landed in Mount Hermon. And they talked about how that was Lucifer, the war in heaven, and their craft crash landed, and they love Lucifer. I was like, really? I was like, wow, you guys have gone down a very dark road. But I think you just basically outlined that, of course, with Jacob Rothschild and Marina Abramovic standing in front of that one, Lucifer calling his legions to the light, kind of like the Statue of Liberty. We know the Masons built that. So there's a lot of stuff out there, I think, that's trying to, clue us up. But we have to just, like what's beautiful about you, we get a little help in that direction.
Well, and by the way, let me just add this one thing. So I have had, because you cannot operate in certain arenas and not be heavily interacting with people who are Masons. Yeah. I would have to say that the vast majority, I can only think of maybe 2 people that were actually offensive, or people that I just wanted nothing to do with in that arena. Most of the people that are Masons are salt of the earth. They are actually, they go to church, they, help in the community stuff. They will get promotions to very specific programs. And part of the reason for that is, if you see, you're in a SAP program, a special access project, somebody says, yeah, I'm going to vouch for this other guy, kind of like a made man type thing in the mob, but somebody's vouching for you and handhold and make sure that they're going to stay the course and stay the line. Well, that's part of how the intelligence world works. And you get to know somebody, you're comfortable with them, you'll vouch for them, and then they get access to be in a particular project. It's worked in a lot of ways. The problem is that people in that kind of position they swear oaths and to the organization, right, that supposedly supersede their oaths to the Constitution. And so they have a private oath that is higher than their citizen oath. And then because they come up through the ranks and they tried, true, tested, known, and trusted within what they do, and they get tested on certain things to make sure that they'll, loyalty tests and things like that, and then they get these high positions. And so, for example, one of the people who's very close to me over the years was not a Mason, and he got coached by a superior officer that if he would become a Mason, that gaining rank and getting the right assignments would come much more easily. And without doing that, he probably wouldn't ever achieve what he was trying to achieve. He'd stated what his goals were. And so you have to ask. And nobody technically asks you to want to become a Mason. You have to ask if you hear certain things like that. And then the response is, sure, and they introduce you in and start you through the ranks and all that. Most of the people that I've dealt with were naive on what was going on and where it was going to. What is important, if I'm talking to any of those people right now, and I've talked to many Masons, especially with military backgrounds, go read Morals and Dogma. And it's a hard read, really. It's not a easy, pleasant, light read. But right in the middle of the book, Albert Pike says to all of his Mason cohorts, let there be no misunderstanding. The God whom we serve is Lucifer. Okay, this is the light bearer. Okay, if you're in a church, if you're a person of faith in God above, you can't be double-minded. You can't be in a religious order that's masking itself as just a private, secret handshake group to make sure the streets are straight and aligned north and south, and everything's balanced and the compass and everything's square and all this other stuff. No, you're in a Luciferian organization, and you're picking a side that is anti-Christ. Period. It's Lucifer. They believe that they're at war with God. And even to, for example, Eve, as a rebel eating the fruit, because God wanted her to not understand real knowledge. He was keeping Adam and Eve, unenlightened. And so by eating the apple, she raised ahead in knowledge and like that. And by the way, the attraction for Eve was she wasn't around as long as Adam was. Adam was the greatest scientist that ever existed. He named all the animals to plants. He understood the physics of the planet. And then he realized, with everything he saw, there was no one like him. There was no one that had the same flesh as him. There was no mate for him like there was with everything else. And that's when God put him to sleep and then created Eve with bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. And by the way, out of the side, not out of the head or the foot or something like that, so that he wasn't above her, she wasn't below him. They were partnered in that way. And so with that in mind, there is a Luciferian crowd. They believe that in the whole, the majority believe that they are tied to these aliens that fell to Earth, humanoid, not human, strictly, and to that part of the human race that are within that hybrid community. And so there's way more to this story than most people even have interest in, understandably. Who wants to waste time with all this, craziness? But there is a very real aspect of it, and you see it in the way that these groups commemorate and ritualize everything related to Sirius and to these fallen ones. And by the way, just for a comparison too, by the way, just so that everybody here kind of knows that they do this over and over. What did George Bush do? 3 times after he left the presidency, he, on his birthday, on his 70th, 80th, 90th birthday, he went and parachuted to Earth. He fell to Earth, mimicking this. What did Queen Elizabeth do at the 2012 Olympics, the XXX Olympics? And remember, she's the head of the reptilian tribes in their way of looking at this with the royal. The Canes of the Earth. She went with David Craig. Yeah, and she went to the Olympics and jumped out of the helicopter, supposedly at the Olympics, in this great, it's a great video. You go on the Queen's own website and watch it, Queen Elizabeth, and she falls to Earth. David Bowie, the man who fell to Earth, they ritualize it over and over and over. It's their cult. Excellent. And so now you look at what Hillary's doing in this video. I'll shoot it over to you, Michael. And you go, oh my gosh. I mean, these people are literally certifiable. I mean, most of them should be institutionalized and the room should be padded. The one thing that's not in the budget over at Gitmo is padding for the walls. I think the walls and ceiling should be padded in most all of those rooms.
Definitely. Now, you mentioned Albert Pike, and you've talked about this before, how he said that the Zionist and the Islamic world would fight in World War III. So it looks like they're pushing it in that direction. But I think Trump and team are going to stop this out. So the long wars that, I remember Afghanistan. I'm like, why is this dragging on? We could end this like in 5 days if you give the right people the right, missions. And it just kept dragging out. We're not going to see that anymore with what President Trump's doing. It's going to knock hell out of them.
Yeah, even with what's going on in Iran, remember how long it took that 40 days of shock and awe, and we still had a hell of a fight in our hands once we started to go to the ground stuff. Same thing. In a day and a half, even with the U.S. and Israel and the work that was done previously, back when we bombed the nuclear production facilities, as much as we've done just in the last few hours, you could do bombing in Iran for the next 40 days and still have a plethora of targets left over. So, and we're doing very precise pinpoint, trying to keep human casualties to a minimum, at least within the civilian population. And by the way, I don't know if you know this, if you caught this, the U.S. is going after military targets of every type. Right. The Israelis have been tasked with going after the leadership, and precisely aimed at the leadership who have been killing the Iranian people or who have been involved in the terrorism projects across the world. So they're not even just going in a generic sense at the IRGC or the military personnel. They're not going after barracks as such. Although that's a piece of it, going after IRGC. They went after, it was a decapitation process, and Israel was given the ball on that to take out Khomeini and other of those leaders who authorized and orchestrated the killing of the Iranian people in these protests. About, depending on whose numbers you're looking at, since the first of the year, they've killed something over 30,000 Iranian civilians. I think that number's probably realistically double that, but that's the number that's been passed around. And so anybody that was involved in that, anybody that was helping that, they're the ones that are being targeted, and the Israelis are leading those attacks.
Yeah, I think they just blew up the IRGC, headquarters that was involved in killing a lot of those people. Just blew it, just leveled it, and I was like,
yeah, Gonzo. That was a big explosion.
wow, very, very nice. Now,
and by the way, you think about it. See, that is the group IRGC for everybody here. Back in, I think it was about 2004 or 5. We got wind, and I actually wrote the white paper on it, of IRGC bringing in a group that was going to kill the Saudi ambassador in Washington, D.C. And we tracked their point of entry into South America, and then they came across the border, the Mexican border, into the U.S. and got picked up before they could get to the Saudi ambassador. They were going to kill the Saudi ambassador in a very high-profile, spectacular way. And Soleimani was the one that was behind this at the time. So, for example, my buddy Scott Bennett and others that have had dealings with the Iranian government in the interim were very upset that Trump had Soleimani killed, and because he's such a hero in Iran and loved and everything else. Well, excuse me, this is the guy that invented the IED, improvised explosive device, that technology was spread all over the world to go after people with roadside bombs and things like that, including, by the way, in Colombia during the big wars there, back in Escobar and like that. And so Soleimani was the one who had run the IRGC guys to come into the U.S., kill the Saudi ambassador. And it was also Soleimani who directed the folks to go into Libya to find the Red Crescent workers that had been taken into custody that led to the Benghazi thing. What happened was in mid-July, before Benghazi happened, 2 months earlier, there was some Red Crescent workers, I think 11 of them, that were there working in Benghazi. They're the equivalent of Red Cross. And they were supposedly there to aid Muslims that were in peril from the war going on there in Libya. And so they had been probing this safe house. The media, the complicit media, the bullshit media, kept calling this an embassy at Benghazi. It wasn't an embassy, it was a safe house. And you would know even yourself, Michael, for example, the way the generator and the backup fuel power supply were buried next to it, and it was just a villa. It was a meeting place, and it was in the shadow of the CIA's facility there, a large warehouse-like facility. It was a quarter of a mile behind the villa there in Benghazi. If you walk through the orchard up behind it on the hill, up behind the villa. But it was a mile by car because you had to come out, go down the road, and then go up the hill and then come back in. It was about a mile by car. So when the guys got in that shootout in the Ford Explorers, which were armored, were amazing. They were built in Tacoma, Washington, and they had thousands of hits, some with very heavy lead, and survived all of it. And nobody took nothing got inside the vehicle and got anybody. Amazing, stunning. Even though they crashed into a median doing about 60 miles an hour and tore the whole front of the car apart on one of them. But anyway, the reason that I mentioned that, Soleimani was the one that was orchestrating this with his Quds forces, sending a guy into Libya to to orchestrate everybody to try and find those 11 missing Red Crescent workers, which the British troops had taken into physical custody. But everybody thought that the CIA had taken them and that they were being held in that building behind the villa because they were probing that facility. They blew up a bomb on one of the walls to see who would respond and react to it, kind of probing the defenses and who was involved. That was in mid-July. And because they did that, they got taken into custody. We let the Brits do it for us. And so they were about 10 miles away when the whole Benghazi thing happened in custody. And then after Benghazi, you'll notice that about 2 weeks later, all of those Red Crescent workers magically reappeared and were returned to Iran. But Soleimani, IRGC, Quds forces were active all over the world. And so, including into America with these people who wanted to kill the Saudi ambassador, we tracked them all the way back then. We tracked, and the reason this is important this exact moment, we tracked through Venezuela numerous Quds forces and IRGC people being flown in direct flight from Iran to Venezuela, and coming off the aircraft and then coming north towards America and into other countries in the region to cause all sorts of mischief. By the way, one of the other things that they did, they blew up an Israeli embassy in Argentina. And that was Iran directly that did that. And so I dealt with the guys that did the investigation on that even the last few days. Iran's been exporting all sorts of terror for a very long time. This isn't to help Israel. This is to help the world that we're doing what we're doing. And we're not carrying anybody else's water. We're doing this to save the world. We stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon, we're going to save, huge numbers of lives from all over the world, even if it's just the threat of them using it against us. So anyway.
Well, this is also payback for those 241 Marines that were killed in Beirut by Iran. So it's...
Peach it, brother, man. Peach it. I'm telling you, Admiral Lyons, we were talking when he was still alive, and one of the big questions that he had was why he was out there in the Mediterranean, and they were tracking. They knew where all of the terrorists were exactly after they blew up the Marine barracks. He knew where they were, and they were waiting on Reagan to give him permission to go take them out, to literally surgically go out and take out all of those people that killed our Marines. And that was not allowed to go forward. And it was Cheney and a couple of other people that had certain positions around Reagan that were advocating not to do it. And the head of the CIA at that time, I'm trying to think of his name right now, it's lost it here. I can't believe it. But he didn't want to let them do it. But the reason that wasn't known to Admiral Lyons at the time was because we were tracking their finances. And so we had certain software that was in the banking and trade systems, commonly known, street known as Promise Software and similar. And we were tracking all of their money out through their various parts of their networks. And so we didn't want to stop them from getting away because we were going to deal with them otherwise. And there was other threats that were out there looming. So if we just went out and killed them, as Admiral Lyons wanted to do, and thought, why aren't you letting this loose? It was because Casey,
Casey,
he specifically told him to stand down and hold tight. And there was other things that were going on at the time, and it's just too long of a story for now. But Iran, has been a problem all along. Millions are dead because of the leadership in Iran. What President Trump is doing, what America is doing with a president that has decided to put an end to their evil practices and not to live under the, thumb of Iran, the threat of Iran, is saving the world to allow for a more peaceful future, because we're just not going to let them get away with this stuff anymore. 47 years is too long already.
Awesome. All right. So, people can reach you at, allpatriots.gumroad.com, and Jennifer Mack, thejennifermack.com.
Yeah, so, she just put up the other day that I think is actually pretty important, because